Tattoo machines, one of the most important tools that we're using as an artist. Nowadays you see on the market there's so many different tattoo machines to choose from. If you understand the basics of how a tattoo machine works, what the differences are, you will have a much easier way of choosing the right tool for you. Today we're going to be breaking down the details of what makes a good machine. This will help you choose the best possible tool for you. One thing I see being done a lot nowadays is many of these manufacturers, they don't take safety seriously. As long as they can sell a lot of machines, it's good for them. I think it's up to us as artists to understand how these things work and how we actually can keep our equipment clean. The other thing is that if you have a tattoo machine that does not work precisely as you want it to work, or if it works differently depending on the needle grouping or differently depending on the day, if it's not consistent, if it's not powerful enough, you're going to have a very difficult time creating the artwork that you really want to do. So the easiest way to grow as an artist is to have a really good tool at your disposal. Because when you don't have to second guess your inks, your needles, your tattoo machine, any of the outside of you things, when you don't have to guess those, the only thing you can improve on then is yourself. So I think it makes sense to choose the best possible tools, because when you're at this stage and you use the best possible tools, there's simply no other way to improve than just looking in the mirror. Choosing the best possible tools, inks, tattoo machine, needles, and so forth, eliminates a lot of second guessing. Because if we want to improve as tattoo artists, but we keep second guessing our tattoo machines, second guessing our inks, and so forth, we don't allow enough focus on improving as artists. So choosing the best possible tools and also learning to use them properly will help you become the best artist you can possibly be, because now you actually have time to reflect on yourself and grow as an actual artist, instead of just trying out a new machine, new needles, new pigments. It makes sense to use the same tools for a longer period of time, because every time when you change, there's always a learning curve to having a new machine or using different needles or inks. So we don't want to go through this learning curve again and again and again and again. Rather, let's now make a decision to have a great tool and then go forward in learning to actually using that tool. And after, let's say, half a year or so, this should be second nature to use this specific tool. So I really recommend not keep flip-flopping between a lot of different tools all the time, because I see a lot of artists who every 2 months they choose a new machine, or they try a new needle brand, or they try different inks, but they're never really taking the time to learn what they're using. Obviously, the first step to choose these products would be to understand the basics of how these different products work. So that's what we're going to do today, is understand the basics of how different tattoo machines work, what their benefits are, what the cons are, and after that maybe you can make a decision. Maybe you already have a machine that you feel great about, or maybe after this you choose a new tool, but after you choose it, if you feel like you made a good choice, stick with it for a while. Let it become a second part of you. A simple example to explain this to you is, if you've changed the brand of computer or phone that you're using, it feels very weird, right? But after half a year of using that phone or computer, it's just second nature. You don't even think about where you're clicking, how your thumb works. It's just second nature. So it's the same way with tattoo machines, needles, and pigments. So instead of quickly judging something, give it time, understand how it works, and then become familiar with it. So let's start with the basics, the basic different types of tattoo machines out there. First one we're going to cover is coil machines. We're not going to cover coil machines in great detail because I feel like it's not a machine that the majority of new artists are going to be using. There's a clear transition towards more rotary-based tattoo machines. I don't see a huge benefit in choosing coil machines no matter what work you're doing, but I do understand that people who have used this method for a longer while feel more comfortable with it, or they have their reasons to choose these specific machines. But I feel you can eliminate a lot of nonsense time that goes into maintaining and fixing and troubleshooting these machines if you just choose a simple, well-functioning rotary machine. Now, the main difference between coil machines and rotary machines: coil machine functions with magnetic coils and a rotary machine functions with a motor. Coil machines are often very noisy. They require a lot of maintenance, kind of like a guitar that you always have to tune up. Many of them are specifically built to drive just a certain range of needles, let's say from a 3-liner to a 5-liner or 7-liner, and others are built to drive larger groupings through the skin. Some are built to run much faster, some are built to run much slower. So many of these are kind of built for a very specific task. With coil machines, the driving mechanism is an armature bar moving up and down. With rotary machines, we have many different drive mechanisms available. Some are direct drive, where the power transitions directly from the motor through a cam wheel into the needle bar or plunge bar. Some also work with an armature bar. Some have a linear drive. Rotary machines are powered by an electric motor. They usually run very smooth, low maintenance, you don't have to fix so much. Obviously it depends on the machine type you're using. Not a lot of vibration, and they're usually very easy to clean compared to a coil machine. These different drive mechanisms have different properties. A direct drive, where the plunger bar is attached to the cam wheel, is going to have a little bit more of a side movement compared to a linear drive, which is only up and down, or an armature bar, which is also up and down. Some are really efficient at transitioning the power. In some mechanisms, some power might be lost due to friction or some softness. Some of these drive methods also offer something we call give, or adjustable give, which means that we can adjust the machine to have less torque or less force in penetrating the skin. I think the greatest misconception with give is a lot of artists who say that the machine becomes really soft and so it causes less trauma for the skin, better healings, and so forth. Now, I want to break it down to the basics for you to understand what give really does. So if we increase the give on the machine, it means that the machine does not have the proper power to really penetrate the skin. Now, for different needle groupings, it takes different pressures to actually penetrate the skin. As with tattoo, we want to make sure that we always hit the right layer of the skin to deposit ink effectively. If we do not hit the right layer of the skin, we're just gonna be traumatizing the epidermis but not leaving pigment in the right layer, and then we're gonna have a faded tattoo. So now if we have a machine with give, or we adjust the give so the machine is very soft, it just means that certain groupings of needles will not fully penetrate the skin always. The machine will work differently depending on different groupings, depending on different skin types, depending on different areas. Now the illusion of creating a smoother tattoo or less trauma becomes evident, as artists think that they're actually fully saturating something, but they're actually not penetrating the right layer of the skin, so they're just more scratching the surface. And of course this means that they're also depositing less ink in the skin, which means they have to go over the area more and more and more to create the desired effect. And while yes, it's definitely possible to create very, very smooth shades like this, because you're just depositing a very small amount of ink every time you pass the skin, because you're not even going to the right layer. This is not an effective way of depositing ink in the skin. But working like this for 5 or 10 years, you can become very, very accustomed to this way of working. You can still achieve great results, and you can believe that this is an effective and best way of creating nice smooth gray washes, for example. In fact, the most effective way to create a tattoo is to always hit the right layer of the skin and put the desired amount of ink or pigment in that layer as fast as possible. Now, obviously, we need to find some kind of balance there, because if we're working with gray wash, for example, we don't necessarily want to create a shade that involves needle pin marks on the skin. We're going to go more into detail into this when we're going into tattoo techniques, but just saying that the most effective way of actually depositing ink in the skin is going to the right layer and depositing the desired amount of pigment into that layer of the skin. Now, if we're depositing less ink by not going to exactly the right layer or just having very little pigment on the needle, we just have to go over the skin more and more and more. And I think it makes sense from the beginning to learn the most efficient way of tattooing. Now, I also understand that I might get a lot of pushback saying these things about GIVE because many people swear by it. I can understand that some people feel like this is a beneficial thing to have, but I would argue that it's more beneficial to have this power and still by yourself choose what layer of the skin to hit instead of giving this power to the machine. And I think this is a topic that we can discuss in more detail through our lives and as we go into tattoo techniques. And I'm sure that there might be a lot of questions regarding this, so I'm very open for discussion around this subject. Another thing that gets misunderstood very easily is stroke length. There's quite a big group of people who believe that stroke length relates to the distance the needle hits inside the skin, but this is not true. Anybody who has ever used with a tattoo machine that you can adjust the needle depth, you know that you can, even if you had a 5mm stroke length, you can adjust the needle length so that the needle doesn't even hit the skin. And with a 2mm stroke length, you could go to as deep as 5 or 6 or 7mm into the skin. So stroke length is not the same as needle depth. I will repeat this just to make it very clear. Stroke length is not the same as needle depth. Stroke length just relates to the distance the needle is traveling up and down, not the amount of needle that hits the skin. So what now happens if you have a 2mm stroke length? If your needle is hanging out even a little bit, the needle will not go back inside the tip. So what is this going to cause? It's going to cause a needle that is not carrying a lot of pigment on it. Now, if the needle is not carrying a lot of pigment on it, what happens? Even if you hit the right layer of the skin, it does not deposit a lot of ink because it doesn't have a lot of ink on it. That's why a lot of misinformed black and gray artists often choose a stroke length of 2mm or 2.5mm, something very, very small, as they think they can achieve a smoother gradient by using something like this. Now, yes, if you don't want to be efficient, this is for sure one way of creating a very smooth gradient. But what happens is you're still destroying the skin because you're still penetrating the skin, but you're just going in with a needle that doesn't carry pigment on it. So basically going into the skin with a half-empty needle, yes, you will be able to create more smooth shades because you can make many mistakes and you still put almost no pigment in the skin. This is not an efficient method by any means. Again, to achieve the most efficient method, you should still be able to carry pigment on the needle and go in and leave the desired result. We don't want to go in with a half-empty needle. Now, it's a different thing if you want to dilute your inks, then you should still choose the proper dilution and go in the skin. Because what now happens if you have a needle like this that doesn't really, go in and get pigment on it? Then if you want to do any darker colors or anything like this, it's just going to deposit way less. So in reality, of course, if you're used to using a machine like this and you've been using it for 10 years or something, you will feel like this is the best way. But it's another way of just letting the machine dilute your inks for you because it's just not picking up a lot of ink. So you're going to have big troubles coloring in black solid areas and stuff like this, and you're probably going to end up causing a lot more trauma than you actually need to. And it's true that even some people are teaching these techniques that they have been using for 10 years, because yes, they can work, but they're not efficient. They're not the right way to actually put the pigment in the skin. And as said, with all these topics, I'm very happy to discuss this with you in greater detail. I'm open for opinions. Let's discuss those. I think at the end of the day, we still got to go down to facts and understand at the very basic level what happens when we're tattooing. And this way we can build a very, very solid foundation for all of you. So you will have the strongest possible tattoo techniques going forward. And when your techniques are good, when your tools are good, the only option left to improve is to improve as an artist. Different rotary machines also come with different motors. Some have stronger torque, some have weaker torque. Now I would strongly suggest to opt for something with a very strong torque so that you can use any needle grouping and it will still work the same way. Because the larger the needle grouping we're trying to put through the skin, the stronger the pressure is going to be to actually put the needle through the skin. And if we have a very weak motor, the machine is going to slow down. It's not going to have the actual power to push the needle through. So for me, the preference is always, well, not always, but what I've liked using lately is a direct drive, because I know there's not going to be a lot of loss of power in the transition from the motor generating the power into the needle bar. My choice for a machine is something that has a very strong motor, doesn't get tired when using larger groupings. I also want something that runs smoothly, is easy to clean, has a battery with a long enough life, and I prefer to have a machine where I can change the plunger bar so I can make sure that the machine and all the parts coming in contact with the needle are going to be clean. That's why I strongly advocate against majority of pen models, because it's very difficult to clean them. Some pen models and some manufacturers have taken this into consideration, but the majority of them have not. So in many of these models, the plunger bar is inside the machine and it's not possible to really open the machine to clean everything. And I do not suggest using these machines where the plunger bar is hidden and you can't even clean it, because there will be residue on your needles no matter how clean you think you work. So if you're going to be using a pen model, I strongly suggest to opt for something where you actually can open it and clean the interior parts properly. If you watched and read the part about Hygiene 101, then you should understand cross-contamination and be able to take these things into consideration. Make sure also to use a machine where you can change the grip. So I would prefer single-use grips, but if you can't, then make sure that your grip is autoclavable so that you can make sure that you can sterilize it between uses. I would suggest that you get a machine with a battery pack, because these are really good nowadays, especially if you're working on larger tattoos where you want to move around a little bit. Also, using a clip cord or RCA cord always increases the risk of cross-contamination. You need to always protect it, keep it clean. It's still going to touch here and there. So I think working with a battery, it allows for better movement for you as an artist, especially if you want to move from different angles. It also allows for you to work in a slightly safer way. So in summary, to keep it easy and effective, I would go and opt for a rotary machine. I would probably choose a direct drive. I would choose a strong enough motor, easy to keep clean. I would choose a battery also. I'm not a big fan of give, as we already spoke about. The stroke length I would keep is a minimum 3.5 and maybe up to 5 millimeters. Something in between there is probably pretty good depending on the machine you're gonna use. I would not go lower than 3.5. So our aim is to have a low maintenance, very efficient machine that easily deposits ink in the skin and is easy to keep clean. Weak machines will cause excess trauma and they will teach you a very ineffective way of tattooing. So understanding some of this basic terminology and what these different things do will help you in choosing a good machine for yourself going forward, instead of having to buy new machines all over again just because you made wrong decisions. And also choosing the right tool, as said, will help you avoid learning bad habits or learning bad inefficient techniques. Once you have chosen the proper tool for yourself, learn to use it, become a friend with it, let it become second nature. Do not keep flip-flopping all the time. That's why we're going through the basics now, so you'll be able to choose the perfect tool for yourself and then become familiar with it throughout the next half year or year. Now for homework, I would like all of you to share your different experiences with different machines. You can tell what stroke length you use, what machine you used, etc. The second part is to really start paying attention to the things that we spoke about here. I think it's very crucial that I'm not only teaching you, but you're actually activating your brain and starting to pay attention to the things that we spoke about. So for instance, if you're using a machine that has a setting for give, you can try with a softer hit and with a harder hit and try to pay attention to what happens when you're adjusting the give. If you're having a direct drive or linear drive or swash drive or whatever drive system, you can pay some attention to this also. If you have two different machines, try to pay attention to how they're working, how noisy they are, etc. Pay attention to how you can actually keep your machine clean. Pay attention to the ergonomics of it. If you have a machine where you can change the stroke length, try this also. Maybe you have two different machines with two different stroke lengths. You can play around with this as well. And try to notice how these different adjustments actually change your way of tattooing. If you do this, I'm fairly sure that you will have a very good basic understanding of these different terminologies and how they affect the machine. And knowing and understanding these things will go a very long way in you not having to second guess whether it's your machine that's not working or something else. So if we build a very strong foundation together now in all these different topics, when we have a solid foundation, we can slowly start understanding where the mistakes come from. Because if we have 20 different things that might cause an issue when you're tattooing, let's say you have a blurred line or you're not having problems getting ink in or stuff like this, then as we know these different things, we can start eliminating and figuring out, is this an issue? Is this an issue? Is this an issue? No, okay, there's only two things that can cause this issue now because we know we have eliminated all these other problems. By learning this way and really understanding the basics, we're going to have a much easier way of learning together, and I'm going to have a much easier way of teaching you and finding the actual problems that you're going to be facing throughout your journey together with me. So a bucket with 20 holes is going to leak a whole lot. A bucket with one hole might still leak, but it's way easier to find that one hole and plug it, and then it's going to work. As we go forward, we can start diving more deep into different machines and stuff like this, but I think this serves as a very good basic now, and I really hope that you put your time into these exercises that I gave you and start studying these things. Thank you. All right, so I completely forgot to talk about one subject, which is definitely linked to machines, and that's voltage. One of the most common questions with artists is usually what voltage are you using, what voltage should I be using, etc. So let's get started with the basics. What does voltage do? Well, depending on the machine and depending on the motor, the voltage is going to give an input to the motor, which is going to determine the speed and the torque of the machine. So voltage is completely machine dependent. That's why having one artist using 9 voltage is not going to translate to you using 9 voltage on a different machine. In addition to that, you should not be choosing the voltage you use depending on what somebody else is using. Because chances of you having exactly the same hand speed as that artist and exactly the same techniques is very slim, which means you should not be using the same speed as just any random artist. You want to determine the speed of your machine according to the speed of your hand. That's why the voltage that you use should be very specific to you. So if your machine is running too slowly for your hand speed, you're going to be leaving a lot of small dots of needles. If it's running too fast, you're going to be chewing up skin. So you're just going to find the middle ground, what works for your hand speed and your machine. We're going to go much more into depth on different speeds depending on what kind of techniques, what kind of patterns you want to leave in the skin. But just to understand that voltage is not something that should be asked so much like, what are you using? What are you using? Hey, what should I be using? It depends on your machine and it depends on your hand speed. So don't go around just trying to copy everybody else. You need to adjust according to your level, your hand speed and whatever machine you are using. And whenever you pick up a new machine, I would suggest to start with lower voltages and then increasing it from there if you feel like your machine is too slow. And if you feel like your machine is lacking power, the right way would not be to increase voltage, because usually then you're increasing speed. If you're lacking in power, you just need a more powerful machine with a stronger torque.